Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of our Am I the Butthole? Am I the butthole for bringing up my brother's premature birth at Christmas dinner to get my parents to shut up? I am a nurse practitioner and I am the primary care provider for a lot of the low-risk maternity cases at the practice where I work. I also work hand in hand with the doctors and midwives to create a healthy maternity, birth, and postpartum situation. My fiancée is completing her residency. We live together and have for a few years now. We aren't in any hurry to get married. We originally had plans to do so a couple of years ago, but then we got really busy for 2 years. It is driving my very religious parents crazy that their youngest son is living in sin. I don't really care. I'm an adult and I do what I want. We are getting married in June. So we are visiting my parents for Christmas. The way it came together this year, everyone is at my parents' house. So that's my folks, my 3 siblings, myself and fiancé, and 7 grandchildren. So 17 people. At dinner my mom starts going on about how she is so glad that we are finally getting married and she won't be embarrassed at church anymore. And my dad says how proud he is of his 3 older kids who all either waited to get married before moving in together or got married right away after moving in together. My fiancé was getting embarrassed and I was getting mad over this stupid argument we have had too many times. And a family dinner was the last straw. I have asked them repeatedly to just accept that they cannot control how I live my life. I refuse to stay with them when I visit even if I come alone. Hotels are just easier. So I started talking about a premature baby I had been reading about. It was almost 3 months premature and weighed about 1.6 pounds. It was super strong and healthy for being born so little, and the NICU had high hopes for the baby doing well. My mom and dad both got deer in the headlights looks on their faces. Too bad. Should not have F around with my fiancé's feelings. So I asked about my oldest brother. He was born almost 4 months premature. Is there a chance that we could check out the family album where we keep all the records of family births and stuff? I already know my brother was over 9 pounds and almost 23-inch long when he was born. My grandmother told me all about it the first time my parents tried to shame me. The subject gets changed very fast. After supper my parents told me that I should not try to embarrass them with private things that are not my concern. I told them that if I heard anything about my living arrangements ever again for the rest of my life I would make sure to keep bringing up the fact that my mom was in her 2nd trimester when they got married. My parents are mad at me for telling them how to behave in their own home. But my fiancé is happy that they seem to be off the subject for good. Am I the butthole? Next story. Am I the butthole for calling my brother's girlfriend a gold digger after she Googled the cost of our Christmas gifts? My brother James has a girlfriend, Lindsay, who he's been dating for 7 months. He decided to bring her to Christmas at my house, stay over Christmas evening and leave the next day after lunch. I'd met Lindsay at drinks before this and she seemed nice. When they arrived, Lindsay walked in and complimented my decorations, large tree in the foyer, and asked how much they cost. I was a bit surprised by the question, but I just said more than I'd like and moved on. Throughout the evening she asked several questions centered around money. She asked my husband how much he paid for our house, my stepdad how much money he made in his previous job, how much my watch cost. She even Googled one of our art pieces to see how much it sold for and started talking about how crazy it was that we spent that much, which frankly was very uncomfortable. My stepdad pulled my brother aside and asked if there was a problem, but my brother just said it was normal for her to do that, but he did say he'd speak to her about it. On Christmas morning we all gathered round to open presents and thankfully, Lindsay didn't say anything untoward, so I figured James had spoken to her about her intrusive questions. However, at lunch, we were talking about plans for January and Lindsay loudly said she didn't know how we could afford to do anything in January as she added up the total we'd spent on gifts, and then proudly proclaimed the total amount. The whole table went silent, and honestly, I was equal parts shocked and annoyed that someone could be so ignorant. I looked at Lindsay and said, "You are the world's most diligent gold digger. Seriously, would you like to be the family accountant since you're already tracking expenses?" Lindsay stuttered out an apology and tried to explain, but my stepdad just changed the conversation and we moved on. She was mercifully quiet for the rest of dinner. After they left, my brother messaged me saying I'd really upset Lindsay and was out of line with what I said. I argued that he had said he'd talk to her and he clearly didn't, not that someone should have needed guidance to know how crass her comments were. He is saying I owe both of them an apology, but I think Lindsay's behavior was disgraceful. My parents say Lindsay was wrong, but I probably should have said something in private, or they could have, and I shouldn't have said something in front of everyone. Am I the butthole? Next story. Am I the butthole for throwing away the elf on the shelf and ruining Christmas for my kids after my husband's prank? For context, this year was the first time we would try the elf on the shelf with our kids. We have 3 kids: Lucas, 9-year-old boy, Andy, 8-year-old boy, and Claire, 5-year-old girl. Where Lucas and Andy are from our past relationships. However, Miles, my husband 37-year-old, has accepted Andy as his, and I accepted Lucas. I am 35-year-old woman. Every Christmas is special for Andy. His birthday is on December 24th. His dad started a tradition where Santa would have consideration with him for being a kid of Christmas. So he feels magical and special. I always try to give him that. Last year, I left Santa Claus' footsteps, ate a carrot and grass he left for Rudolph. Stuff like that. My husband doesn't think it's a good idea I do all that for him, and I'm showing favoritism. So, we should shut it down, because of my ex's decision to create a tradition without considering my other kids' feelings. I disagree since I do consider the 3 of them. But he asked if we could sew something else, like the elf on the shelf. I had no problem with it, but I didn't know how that works. He explained me quickly, and since he was the one who offered, I let him do it. We bought the cute elf. My kids named it Bob. Later my husband explained them they should behave and never touch or hold Bob if they don't want it to be naughty. At first, it was cute to see them spy on Bob, try to see it fly each night. Andy was the most excited of all. I found him one night talking with it, asking it if Santa still remembered him. But my husband took seriously the behave or Bob would be naughty part. Lucas was his first victim after he didn't do his chores. The next day, his face was drawn with Sharpie markers. Then Claire, who touched Bob and her fave onesie was destroyed. Apparently, Bob had cut some pieces of it while she was sleeping. Miles was having fun, but I could see my kids weren't. I talked to him about how we should lower the pranks. He agreed but wanted to catch Andy since he hadn't break any rules. I told him that Bob's supposed to tell Santa instead of being naughty. We argued, but he finally agreed. Fast forward, it's Christmas evening and in the afternoon we had some of Andy's friends to celebrate his birthday. So the kids were playing in backyard. But my husband looked sus. I decided to look for Bob. It was supposed to be in the kitchen but it wasn't there. I asked Miles where it was and he told me no idea. I started getting paranoid, but Andy asked me if we could cut the cake already. I put my best face on and went for it. The cake was in a box, and when Andy opened the box, he starts crying. I take a look and it's ruined. Bob was covered in all of it, appearing he had been eating the cake. Half of the cake wasn't there anymore. Miles starts laughing and so did some of the other parents. My blood is boiling and I grab Bob and throw it in the trash, then I grabbed Miles. We have a terrible argument, calls me in butthole for what I did to Bob, that I've ruined it. How are we supposed to keep the magic with our kids if I wasn't supposed to touch Bob? Next story. Am I the butthole for telling my sister-in-law she can leave Christmas dinner when she freaked out over tampons? Okay, she's not my sister-in-law yet, but I used it to make the title simpler. She's my boyfriend's brother's girlfriend. I am 28-year-old woman have been with my boyfriend, Ian 32-year-old, for 3 years. We've decided to host a small, early Christmas dinner. One of the people invited was his brother, Jake, 26-year-old. Jake asked if he could bring his girlfriend as she was all alone. They'd been together for 3 months, and we agreed, the more the merrier. His girlfriend, AmITheA, 28-year-old, seemed a bit timid but lovely. AmITheA brought her 8-year-old son that we didn't know was coming. She seemed lovely right until she went to the bathroom. She came out shrieking, box of my tampon she in her hand, literally gasping for air in between her shrieks. I could barely understand her. Turns out, my box of tampons was visible. It's within a reach because hey, I need it monthly, why should I hide it and then look for it? She was going off about being disgusting, How could I be so shameless to have this in front of a child and other men and so on? I looked at her in disbelief. I couldn't believe she made a scene about a box of tampons. Has she never been in a shop? Anyway, I told her that my tampons stay where they are, but if she's so pressed, she can leave and go home where no tampons are present. She turned red, quite literally, her face was bright pink. Huffing and puffing, she dressed her kid and told Jake to drive her home, which he did. Jake didn't come back, but he called from her house telling Ian that I was the butthole. I was surprised to hear that Ian, my boyfriend, agreed with him. I thought he would be on my side. We were about to argue, but I decided it wasn't worth it and went to my office to cool down and think this through. Am I the butthole for telling her to leave? Next story. Am I the butthole for not spending this Christmas in the hospital with my daughter? I am a 39-year-old woman and my daughter 16-year-old has had a sensitive stomach ever since she was a kid. There are certain foods that will upset her stomach to the point where she's unable to stop throwing up. We've seen countless doctors, but so far nobody's been able to give us a clear answer. The only advice we keep getting is to identify all trigger foods and cut them from her diet. We have a pretty good idea of what those foods are: soda and other carbonated drinks, chips, Cheetos, and other similar processed snacks, anything oily or fried, and most sweets. Unfortunately, this is exactly the kind of stuff my daughter loves to eat the most. And as horrible as she feels after she has them, she still refuses to cut them out of her diet, which in turn led to her spending a lot of time in the hospital during the past few years. When she was little, it was easier to keep all these foods away from her because I simply wouldn't buy them. But now that she's older, I can't always be there to check what she eats. She eats the greasy pizza at her school's cafeteria, she trades her lunch with her classmates, she goes out with her friends and stops to eat at KFC, and so on. And it always ends with her in the ER, crying and shaking because she can't stop throwing up. This was the case on this Christmas evening as well, when our whole family gathered at our place. And of course, among the many dishes at our Christmas table were some of her main trigger foods, like chips, soda, chocolate, and sweets. Now mind you, these were far from the only foods available to her. We also had a variety of home-cooked, traditional dishes on the table, with ingredients that don't upset her stomach, like vegetables, meat, dairy, etc. All of them delicious and well-seasoned. My daughter herself says she really likes most of these dishes. Despite this, my daughter chose to eat nothing but her trigger foods. I reminded her that they'd make her feel awful, but she said she didn't care, because Christmas is only once a year and she just wants to live a little. Well, this ended with her violently throwing up in the ER a few hours later. She had to be hospitalized for a few days and only just got out of the hospital a few hours ago. And unlike all the previous times when something like this happened, this time I chose to spend my Christmas relaxing at home with the rest of our family, and not in the hospital by my daughter's side. I kept in touch with her through calls and texts, and told her that if she needed anything I'd ask a family member to bring it to her, but I made it clear that I would not be visiting her during her stay. And well, my daughter didn't take this too well. She cried every time we talked on the phone, begged me to come over, told me how horrible I was for abandoning her there all alone, and so on. Most of our family didn't take my side in this either, and during the past few days I got called everything from a little extreme to downright cruel and heartless. Am I the butthole? I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.